So I thought that we should talk about one of our favorite topics, which is how do low carbohydrate diets help? And what is the evidence that they help? And I'm going to take one study to highlight this. So we have a lot of time to kind of go into the granular aspects of the study. So this is an Italian study which was done comparing a very low carbohydrate diet. And there are specific aspects of it from the first 45 days, then the next 45 days. So that would be, if you put 245 days together, that'll be 3 months. Then from 3 to 6 months, and then from 6 to 12 months. So it was a 12-month study. Small group of people. And it was compared to what is called a low-calorie diet. So what is a traditional low-calorie diet that when you go to a doctor, the doctor says, eat a low-calorie diet? What is that?
Vegetables, salad.
All they mean by a low-calorie diet really is that do a low-fat, whatever it is, just reduce your calories. But yeah, if they said vegetables, especially low glycemic index vegetables, then that would be good. So this is a study that was done quite diligently, and it was people on a very low carbohydrate diet versus a low calorie diet. So let's go through the granular details of this. So the low calorie diet and the very low carbohydrate diet, for the first 45 days, so I need to go back one slide. Okay, so you just ignore the next 45 days. That's the first 45 days. The total daily energy expenditure, the total daily energy intake, the amount of calories that they took was about 800 calories. So 800 calories is not just a very low carbohydrate diet. It's actually what is called protein sparing modified fast. Because they gave daily protein intakes. In other words, they gave between 1.2 to 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of ideal body weight. This food was actually made and supplied to the patients. This was made by TheraScience. And they compared it to a low-calorie diet. And this low-calorie diet was for the entire year. So they took an individual and they calculated their amount of calories that they consumed based on what is called a basal metabolic rate. Are you guys aware of what BMR is, or basal metabolic rate? By a show of hands, anybody? Otherwise, I'll explain it. Okay, few hands go up. So if you take somebody in a state of rest, like let's say I'm sitting down, lying down, doing nothing specific. So then I'm at rest. So at that basal metabolism, how much energy do I consume for that time frame? So if you take a basal metabolic rate over 24 hours, and you say to this group of people, I'm going to recommend a diet that is about 500 to 1,000 calories lower than your basal metabolism. Now, this was mostly like a standard American diet because 30% of calories were from fat, less than 7% from saturated fat. So if you look at American Heart Association website, they'll tell you that you need to have less than 7% of your food intake from saturated fat. What are some examples of saturated fat? Butter, animal fat, lard, beef tallow, coconut oil. Okay? About 50% of calories were from carbohydrate and about 25% were from protein. They added fiber, about 30 grams. They restricted sodium intake. Now, so that was for the first 45 days for the very low carb diet group. But for the next 45 days, that means after 6 weeks, they said, you can have 1 to 2 meals per day, but that meal should be low-fat meat or low-fat fish, low-fat eggs, or you can have soy. Now I'll show you how you can cook low-fat meat later on in some of the slides. The total amount of fat was very low. They had about 20 grams of olive oil. So 20 grams of olive oil is about a tablespoon and a half. So what that means is that for the first 45 days, they were really on a starvation diet, which is called a protein-sparing modified fast. For the next 45 days, the protein intake was increased, but the carb intake and the fat intake was kept to a minimum. The low calorie diet group didn't change anything. They kept the same amount of carbs, proteins, and fats. Now at 3 months, so after 3 months of suffering through this process, they said you can add low glycemic index vegetables. So towards the end, I'm going to show you what it means by low glycemic index vegetables. You know, what is low glycemic index? And at 6 months, they said you can pretty much have all carbs. So between 6 and 12 months, after giving them a 6-month period to improve their metabolic health, at 6 months they said you can pretty much add all carbs other than added sugars. So that means they only took out food that was like processed sugars, something you would get in a package. But they said that, hey, keep your calories below 2,000. And at about 3 months, they started something called a personalized exercise protocol. So they said, in addition to the diet, we need you to have some exercise. So these were the group of patients. So if you see here, this is the very low carb ketogenic diet, 15 patients here. This is the low calorie group. They were come about 60 plus 8 to 10 years, divided into males and females equally. If you notice, the very low carbohydrate ketogenic group was morbidly obese because they had their weight in kilogram was about 111, the BMI was close to 40. Whereas the low calorie group were just kind of like just obese. They were not morbidly obese. So if you look at BMI, what is considered to be normal BMI? Body mass index. So body mass index is weight in kilograms divided by meter square.
25 or something.
So 20 to 25 is normal. So what is between 25 and 30? If you are between 25 and 30, what would you be considered?
Overweight.
Overweight. And if you are between 30 and 35? Obese. And if you're at about 40, you're considered morbidly obese, which would be about roughly about 100 pounds over your ideal body weight. So the question that comes about is that in this day and age, if you look at Texas, if you take 100 people, how many of them are obese or overweight? What out of 100?
All people, I think it's 78%, over 65%.
So people are giving me a number of between 65, 70%. So it's close to 70 or a little higher than 70. Between 70 and 72%. So really, it's very high. Now, because they were obese, when you're obese, you have higher blood pressures, and these people had higher blood pressures. Their A1C was high. I mean, not dramatically high, 6.6. The A1C was also high in obese people. So I want to know from you guys, when you see somebody who is morbidly obese, like let's say either BMI over 30, or you take somebody who is got a BMI of about 32 plus, and you ask me, are they making more insulin compared to a person who's non-diabetic and normal weight? Or are they making less insulin? What would you tell me? So by design, people cannot get obese without making insulin. Okay? And morbidly obese people have this genetic tendency to have what is called beta cell hypertrophy. So what does beta cell hypertrophy mean? That means beta cells are the ones that are making insulin. So the insulin producing machinery dramatically increases in size to make more insulin. So when you see a morbidly obese person, never think that it's a moral failing. It's a failing because of poor character or a moral failing. It's a failing because they have an endocrinologic disorder, an endocrine disorder that's making them make more insulin. So you cannot become heavy unless you make insulin. Now there is an upside to being obese and being a diabetic than being thin and being a diabetic. And what is the upside? What is the upside to being obese and being a diabetic compared to being a diabetic but being thin? What you do have, you're right, what you do have is that you have an intact insulin making machinery. Whereas a person who is thin and a diabetic, their insulin making machinery is destroyed. So which one of these individuals can regain their health and become a non-diabetic better? So obese. So, you know, this all is not lost when you're heavy and a diabetic, but it is much more difficult to regain normal health if you are thin and you're a diabetic. That means your insulin making machinery is more or less destroyed. Now, in this study, I'm not going to talk much about cholesterol, but I'm going to say that if you take a person and you put them on a starvation diet, if you basically starve them, you know, you give them less food, the cholesterol levels will fall. Okay? So that's different than a low carb diet in which you're not trying to make people lose weight, in whom the cholesterol levels will go up eventually. So what happened in this study? So we're going to look at these people at 3 months and also at 12 months. So here it is, and we'll go through in detail with all of these. So this changes in weight, body mass index, blood pressure, and A1C at 3 months. So what happened? So the people who were consuming a very low carb ketogenic diet, they lost roughly about 9.5 kilograms, which is roughly around 22 pounds at 3 months. Their body mass index dropped by 3.57 kilograms per meter square. Their blood pressure reduced by 8.5 millimeters of mercury. And their A1C dropped by 0.69, which is quite dramatic. They were 6.6 or 6.7. If they dropped by 0.69, they went below 6, which is considered to be fairly decent. On the other hand, the low-calorie diet group, the group that was just on a low-fat diet, low-fat, calorie-restricted diet, their weight did not change, their BMI did not change, their blood pressure went up slightly, the A1C came down a little bit, but not by much. So now we're going to look at it at 12 months. So remember, in this study, the first 45 days was basically protein sparing modified fast. You had protein but nothing else. In the next 45 days, your protein intake was increased, but your carb and fat intake was still very low. Between 3 months and 6 months, you added low glycemic index vegetables. And at 6 months, they said, you pretty much eat all the carbs that you want other than added sugar. So you would expect that At 12 months, when you check these people, all these changes will be reversed. You will not lose any weight, your blood sugar will normalize, your blood pressure will go back up, right? That's what you would expect. But not so. Weight loss continued. They lost almost about 13 kilograms, from 9.5 to 13. So in the next 6 months, or next 9 months, they continued to lose weight. They lost more BMI. Instead of 3.5, it was 4.7. Their blood pressure dropped further. Instead of 9 millimeters, it was almost 14 millimeters of mercury. The drop in A1C was maintained. Now, in the low-calorie group, none of these changes happened. The blood pressure went up a little bit. There was no weight loss. There was no BMI improvement. And there was really no improvement in blood sugar control. So here it is in graphic format at 3 months. Almost a 9-pound weight loss. And then that is from time 0 to time 3 months. And then at time 0 to time 12 months, about almost 13 kilograms of weight loss in the low carb group. BMI change from 3.5 to 4.7. Change in hemoglobin A1C at 3 months and 12 months. I mean, it started out at 7 here in these people and came down a little bit in the low calorie group, the ones that were given some supervision to reduce their calories. But look at the decrease in the low carb group. It went down by 0.6 points, 0.67, and it maintained at 12 months despite them adding carbs at this point. Now what about medications? These people, the very low carb group, were morbidly obese, as you have seen. And because they were morbidly obese and they had a higher A1C, 14 of the 15 patients were on some kind of a diabetic medication. So it was metformin or sulfonylurea or GLP-1 or SGLT2 or DDP4 inhibitors. So I want to ask you guys, can anybody give me a name of a sulfonylurea? Glimepiride, glipizide, anybody takes that? Okay. So these are medicines that go and tell the pancreas to make more insulin. Okay, so basically you are making, what is type 2 diabetes? Type 2 diabetes is a disorder of insulin resistance in which is the insulin level high or low?
It's high.
It's high. So it makes no sense for modern medicine to give somebody who's obese and already has a high insulin to ask the pancreas to make more insulin, right? So if a physician is prescribing a sulfonylurea to an obese diabetic patient, they are doing something fundamentally wrong, okay? Now what is a GLP-1 agonist? Give me an example. We have talked about GLP-1 agonist here many times. Ozempic, good. Manjaro. What does that do?
It slows down the metabolism of the food that you eat.
So it slows down gastric emptying. If you eat the right kind of food, if you don't eat carbs, what does it do to insulin levels? It reduces insulin levels. But if you take GLP-1 agonists and eat a lot of carbs, what will it do to insulin levels? It'll increase the insulin levels. So you will not get as much benefit from taking a GLP-1 if you eat a lot of carbs. Okay? What is an SGLT2 inhibitor? Any of you know what an SGLT2 inhibitor is? Go ahead.
Is that what you pee out sugar?
You pee out sugar. Fantastic, Kathy. So you give, the body is designed to filter sugar through the kidneys and then reabsorb all the sugar after it filters it. But this medicine blocks the reabsorption of sugar, so you pee about 100 to 150 grams of sugar per day. So 100 grams is about 25 teaspoons of sugar. 150 grams is roughly around 37.5 teaspoons of, or what, almost 40 teaspoons of sugar. So it reduces your sugar levels, and when it reduces your sugar levels, then the body starts using fat for fuel. And then can anybody give me an example of what a DPP-4 inhibitor is? So Ozempic is GLP-1. Our body makes natural GLP-1. So in other words, our body is making that compound, and that compound is short-lived. It lives for a very short time because it's destroyed by an enzyme called DPP-4. So this drug taken orally blocks that enzyme, so it leaves the natural GLP-1 in longer. So I don't have problem with people using GLP-1 agonists, SGLT2 inhibitors, or DPP-4 inhibitors in people who are obese and diabetic. But you should always question the rationale when obese diabetic is being given a sulfonylurea. So at baseline, they were taking all of this. But remember, remarkably, at 12 months, almost all 15 patients, like actually not almost, all 15 patients stopped using all of these medicines other than metformin. So that brings us to metformin. What does metformin do? So we had problems with sulfonylureas. Do we have problem with metformin in an obese diabetic? No, right? The reason we don't is because metformin makes insulin work better. It's an insulin sensitizer. So it's not too bad. So you can see that there was a dramatic improvement in the number of patients taking medications, whereas in here, in the low-calorie group, 15 were on metformin, but at 12 months, 6 of them had to go on a GLP-1 agonist, and 1 of them had to go on an SGLT2 inhibitor, so they didn't do as good. So this study had something very interesting going on with it. Go ahead, sorry.
Does metformin increase the amount of insulin in your body?
It doesn't.
It does not.
It makes the insulin that is produced work better. So it's an insulin sensitizer. It also does a few other things. It slows down gastric emptying, so it behaves a little bit like a GLP-1 agonist. So if I ask you to go on a low-carb diet and restrict calories to 800 grams, 800 calories per day, you would be hungry for those 45 days, right? And you would like really say, my quality of life is in the tanks, and I really don't like it, and this is like horrible. So this study did a lot of analysis of quality of life in many different ways. So one of them is that what is called cognitive restraint. In other words, when you're on a low-calorie diet, when you're on a low-carb diet, your sugar levels are low, and the sugar levels remain more or less steady, right? This is an important point for you to understand. Let's say I have a CGM right now, so I'm going through the day, and let's say I'm indiscriminate. I go and eat food at the doctor's cafeteria, which is free food for us. People eat food in the morning. Early in the morning they come in, doctors have food, then they have a snack at about 10:30. Then at noon they have another meal. Then at 2:30 they have a snack, and then at 5 o'clock they have dinner. And then pack something and take home. And then they say that the hospital food is horrible. But anyway, the food is not always the best. So what happens if I'm having food out there is that my blood sugar is going up and down. They are oscillating. And oscillating blood sugars are a recipe for hunger. Do you know why? So in other words, I've eaten a mixed meal mixed with carbs, fat, protein, and my sugars have gone up. What does the body do to get the sugars down?
Makes insulin.
Makes insulin. And it makes insulin, then your sugars start falling, and many times they fall below what you started out with. So there are two things that are happening. One is that you're making more insulin, and second thing is that your blood sugar is dropping. So what provokes hunger in our brain? A falling blood sugar level and an increase in insulin. Both of these, in fact, high insulin level creates what is called toxic hunger. So before you think that the very low carb diet will make you feel really horrible, so these guys wanted to see cognitive restraint. Who had more restraint in terms of consuming food that was not good for you? There's also something called uncontrolled eating. You know, sometimes I'm stressed, I'm not paying attention, and I just eat. And then I also have what is called emotional eating. I'm down because my back pain is bad, I'm not able to prepare a good talk. I go down on myself and I say, I don't have any control over how much I eat or what I eat. So these guys checked it. So they checked it at 3 months and at 12 months. So the checking at 3 months was very important because remember, at 3 months, they are still in what is called caloric deficit because they had the protein sparing modified fast for the first 45 days. And between 45 days and 3 months, although they increased the calories by increasing the protein content, they still would never be able to meet their caloric demand. So in terms of cognitive restraint, a higher number indicates that person has better cognitive restraint from increasing their food intake. And in this study, you could see that their cognitive restraint was better both at 3 months and also at 12 months. Whereas cognitive restraint went down. In other words, people on a low calorie diet, low fat diet, heavy in carbs, 50% carbs, they lost cognitive restraint. They would eat more. What about uncontrolled eating? So lower number here is better. That means you're eating less. And in the very low carb group, your uncontrolled eating was lower at both 3 and 6 months. In fact, it was better at 3 months. Whereas in the high carb, low calorie group, it was higher. What about emotional eating? So lower number again is better here. Again, emotional eating was lower at 3 months in the very low carb group, remained low at 12 months, whereas in the high carb, low calorie group, emotional eating went up. Okay? Now, so that's about eating, but quality of life is also there, and people measure quality of life with some health survey questionnaire, and this is a 36-item questionnaire that measures quality of life. And in this, they look at physical functioning. Are you functioning well better? Do you have body pain? What's your general health? What's your vitality? Are you functioning well socially? Is your emotional functioning good? What's your mental health? So in all of these, a higher score means that you're functioning well. In fact, if you have a score of 100, that means you have no disability in any of these factors. So let's see what happened. So this is a slide that is worth going through. So this is quality of life measures. This is very low carb diets here at T0, at 3 months, and at 12 months. These are the physical functioning, body pain, general health columns. And if you can see, they started out at 43 for physical functioning. But look at 12 months, their physical functioning improved. Their body pain, they had pains, aches and pains from obesity, but that improved at 12 months. It improved at 3 months and improved further at 12 months. Look at their social functioning. There is such a stigma of being obese in this society. People look at you different. And what they don't realize is that this is really a societal problem created by food industry, by big pharma, by their genetics. So this is something that we need to help improve. But because they lost weight, their social functioning also improved. I mean, if you are heavy and you lose about 14 kilograms of weight, which would be like roughly around 40 pounds, you would definitely have a better image of yourself. Their mental health improved from 51 to 70. Now what happened? What happened in the low-calorie diet group? So this is the low-calorie diet group.
Not as much improvements.
Not much improvement. You're absolutely right. Physical functioning just did not change. The only thing, and even body pain, went down. In other words, they had more body pain. They had worse social functioning. Their mental health did not improve. So this is a side-by-side comparison, because remember, the people who were very obese, morbidly obese, the very low-carb diet group were morbidly obese. They had lower scores at baseline compared to the low-calorie group, but they actually went over the low-calorie or the high-carb group quite dramatically. 60 over 69, 68 over 53, 70 over 63. The only place where they didn't show a great dramatic surpass was the body pain. But when you compare it to themselves, the body pain improved. Okay, so now you say, Dr. Ali, you have convinced us. I want to consider this in order to improve my health. I want to start on a very low carb program. So say, well, you may not be diabetic, but you want to improve your weight, you want to have weight loss, you want to improve your blood pressure, you want to improve your mood. So what's the first step? You want to jump start it.
Throw away everything in the refrigerator.
So the jump start is what is called a protein sparing modified fast, right? So the protein sparing modified fast is low in calories, low in fat, low in carbs, with an emphasis to replace protein loss. And then after that you go low calorie, low fat, but then you add protein, largely protein. So in other words, that is not as calorie restricted, but it is protein heavy, fat low, and carb low. Then at 3 months you add some low glycemic vegetables or carbs. And then at 6 months, regular carbs are added minus added sugars. But what is missing from here? Is there anything missing in this thing? Is there something that we missed doing between 3 and 6 months? Exercise? Yes. So exercise is key. Why is exercise key? Because when you go on a low carb and calorie restricted diet, you will slow down your metabolism. Your metabolism comes down, so you will not lose as much weight. And in order to prevent your metabolism from slowing down, you need to do exercise. What kind of exercise, we can talk later. I don't know why it's doing that. Okay? So here is my question to you. What is a low calorie, low fat, very low carb diet with emphasis on protein? How would you design such a diet? Now you've heard this. Now you go home and say, okay, I want to do some of this. How would I design it? Okay, so let me help you. So this is also known as protein sparing modified fast. So I don't know why it doesn't want to stay there. Okay, there. So let's say I tell you, hey, for the first 45 days, you can have salmon, which is cooked in a little bit of olive oil with some salt. So you'd say, how much salmon? So I'd say for 800 calories, you need to have about roughly 220 grams of salmon and 20 grams of vegetable oil, which is about a tablespoon and a half. These two together will provide you with 800 calories for the day. That's not very much food.
In ounces, how much salmon is it? 220 grams roughly?
I think that probably is about 10 ounces. No, not even 10. It's maybe about 8 ounces. Yeah, I should have that. I mean, I should talk about in ounces as well. Now, you need to drink about 2.5 liters. Some people drink more. You need to have about 5 grams of salt. You can increase the salt intake because salt intake is very important when you are on a very low calorie ketogenic diet and not consuming carbs. What is the reason why you need to have salt when you're fasting and when you're on a very low carb diet?
To retain water?
You pee a lot.
Retain water?
Say that again?
To retain the water in the body? The salt retains water.
Salt and water, yeah, that's partially right. Anybody else? But why do you need electrolytes extra?
Because
So, go ahead.
when you start burning fat, which is you'll be doing, fat is made up with water, and you pee a lot, and you will lose the salt, and you need to replenish it.
Correct. That's correct. But what happens is that the salt loss becomes accelerated because one of the most important action of insulin on the kidneys is to reabsorb sodium, and when the insulin levels fall, you are dumping salt in urine. So many people need different amounts of salt. It might be more than 5 grams. So you may have to have higher grams. Yes, go ahead, Kathy.
It says vegetable oil up there. Surprised to read that. Is that olive oil only?
I wanted to be olive oil, but I don't know why it came out as vegetable oil. I apologize. I'll change that slide. I'm glad you catch all these wrong things. I would never want you guys to consume vegetable oil. So that's a huge mistake that Kathy caught. Thank you.
Is that better than avocado oil?
I think they're about the same. I would say avocado and olive oil are about the same. Okay. Now, if you talk about lamb, how would you cook lamb so that it is low in fat? So this is our recipe. You take lamb, you cook in an Instapot, you let it sit for an hour or two to cool down. The fat floats to the top, you scrape off the fat, and then you get a weighing scale, and you measure about 400 grams of this lamb, and that is about 800 calories, 410 grams. Okay?
That's the whole day.
That's for the whole day, yes. But this is only for the first 45 days. Now, if you're doing beef, it's recommended you take top round chuck or sirloin because, you know, that's kind of fatty. You can cook it in the Instapot again, do the same thing, let it sit, and you can take 400 grams, that's about 800 calories. Okay, so this is an example of low glycemic vegetables. These are added at about 3 months. So all of these vegetables have a glycemic index of 15. So I want to know how many of you guys know what is glycemic index, what is glycemic load. So what is glycemic index? Let's start with that.
Measure how much it raises your blood sugar.
How much it raises your blood sugar. So if I take rice, you know, white rice, what is the glycemic index of white rice? 100. Somebody said it's about 100, yes. So glycemic index of white rice is even higher than the glycemic index of sugar. And then as you go into brown rice, it comes down. As you go into basmati rice, it comes down. As you go into, have any of you experimented with low carb rice cookers? So, I mean, I don't think you need a low carb rice cooker. You can boil rice and drain off the starch. That's better. But there is Toshiba makes a very nice low carb rice cooker that keeps your rice warm throughout the day. So you can cook brown rice in that or basmati rice. So all of these are low carb, leafy greens. These are cruciferous vegetables. These are other non-starchy vegetables, eggplant, zucchini, mushrooms, green beans, cucumbers. I was surprised tomato was on the list.
Yeah.
Moderate glycemic, I was surprised that these root vegetables are still very good. Carrots, beets, turnips. They're lower than sweet potato and potatoes. So their glycemic index is between 20 and 55, and you can see which one is low. Like for example, turnips are low, radishes are low. What about onions?
Low, very low onion.
So they are low as long as they are raw. Once you cook them, their glycemic index goes up because you break down complex sugars. Have you guys eaten at an Indian restaurant?
Yes.
What is the base of every Indian restaurant dish? Not raw onions, it's onions that are deep fried in vegetable oil. So that's caramelized onions that are deep fried in vegetable oils. They have a high glycemic index, and plus you're consuming a heck of a lot of vegetable oils. Okay, I don't know why it does that. So quickly to conclusions. So what it is that you got to remember, the way the study was done is that you have to first improve your metabolism before you add your carbs, because adding carbs may not be bad at 6 months because you have become insulin sensitive, you have started an exercise program, and carbs at that time may not raise your blood sugar as much, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So you jumpstart for the first 45 days with a protein-sparing modified fast. Over the next 45 days, you increase protein intake but keep carbs and fat low. You add low glycemic index vegetables at 3 months along with exercise. And then this is a maybe. Now this depends on individual to individual, that at 6 months, you can start adding most of the carbs that you are used to having, provided you can monitor your metabolic health, provided you can see how you're doing. So this is a nice segue to the next talk next month. But to conclude again, this study was associated with significant weight loss, there was better blood sugar control, there was drop in blood pressure, and these people were better at controlling their eating in many ways, and they had improved quality of life. So now getting back to this point about adding the carbs at 6 months. So here is the few devices that are on the market. So if you're a diabetic, you can probably get it through your insurance company for the Dexcom, which is G7, or Freestyle Libre, which is 3. But if you're not a diabetic or you don't want to go through the hassle of insurance, you can buy at a less expensive value the Stelo, which is a form of a Dexcom, or Lingo, which is what me and Chana are wearing, which is a kind of a Libre made by Abbott. So how will that help you? So here is on the top graph is somebody who is going through, and that's how I was yesterday. Like I ate all kinds of carbs and my sugar hardly bumped. The second graph is somebody showing a slight increase, but nothing out of ordinary. The fourth graph is showing somebody who's had a sad meal, and look at how their blood sugars spiked. They went up to about 180. So at 6 months after being on this, or even now, if you want to monitor your eating and you have a CGM, which is giving you continuous glucose monitoring, if you eat something and your sugar spikes over 140, so in other words, the sugar that you have before you eat and 30 minutes, 1 hour after you eat should be minimally increased, maybe by about 10, 15, 20 in the most metabolically healthy people. But if it goes above 140, that means that the food that you eat is not metabolically good for you. Your sugar is spiking, your insulin will go up along with that, you will have sugar coating of your blood cells and it may not be as good. So people can really use a CGM to improve their eating habits and tailor their health. So we'll talk about that next time. All right, guys, thank you.